yet.
Doug, you are ready to go.
All right. Welcome to our Wyndham Park, our Citizens in Action Committee meeting, our neighborhood meeting for everybody to be here. The idea of this is we get to see each other, which in the winter, that is fabulous. Because, we don't get to see each other except for, this part of us when we're shoveling. So it's kind of pleasant to be able to see faces, couple faces. So this is a joy. And for everybody that's been able to join on Zoom, thank you for dialing in and thank you for taking us in for tonight. I think we've got a wonderful agenda to go through. I'm very excited about this. I will say, I find it amazing how we could sit as a board, 3 weeks prior to one of these meetings, scratching our heads thinking, well, what do you want to talk about? And then, they shut down the skating rink, or, we've got all this going on here, or we've got an election. So and we always have something going on in City Hall, so that's the fun part of it. So let's go ahead and we'll go through what we're gonna talk about today. I'm gonna quickly go through some programs, so give you a little update. We're gonna hear from our wonderful council president that's here today, Councilman Payne. We were gonna talk about lead in our water. I think most of us got the note from the city and scratched your heads a little bit. I think it'll be fun to hear that. I think from my point of view, I spent I'll step back and I'll just say my working career, I spent as a clinical toxicologist. The last 10 years was working for Children's Hospital, Wisconsin. Part of it was treating children with lead poisoning. So if I could hear about how we can keep kids from getting lead poison, that really makes my day because they're no fun to take care of. The last thing is we're going to hear from our candidates that are running for Senate for the late Carrie Dietzick. She was wonderful. Everybody had a chance to meet her and we're saddened over her cancer reoccurrence and over her death. But we're going to hear about who's stepping in to take her place. All right, so our programs update. So I'm going to start off and say this is what we do. We want to be able to have that connected neighborhood. That's part of this meeting, so we can see each other. And that we don't get to do during the winter as much as we would like. We want to make this a livable neighborhood. I will tell everybody here that at the board, we are going to be looking at this at our mission. What are we doing? Does this need to be updated? At the same time, we're going to be looking at our bylaws, so those need to be updated. So if for some reason you are really into mission and bylaws, let us know. We would love to have you take part because it's your neighborhood and it's your neighborhood meeting. So let us know if you'd like to be part of that discussion. I think it would be wonderful on our point of view. But you can see these are the goals we set up when we had our last kind of strategic planning meeting that matches those of the city.
Doug, could I interrupt you real quick? Could you ask Julie Anderson if she can hear us okay?
So Julie Anderson, can you hear us?
Thumbs up.
Yes, I can hear you, but the room is dark. So
I can hear that.
The room is dark.
All right, our next slide. So, and before I forget, since I'm waving this around, did everybody get to fill one of these out? So we have this little survey for everybody to do. It's I just took a quick look at it to see what it was. But please fill it out. It's important that we hear what everybody has to say. Get your input on everything that we do. So this is just some of the things we offer. Home security rebates, if you're putting in Ring doorbells, lights, new locks, you can just let us know. We can give you a rebate for that. If you're my daughter they need a new kitchen. They live in a northeast house. Right over here at Hayes, so it's an old house with a very old kitchen. So they would be eligible for a low interest home loan. I'm trying to convince her to panic. But we'll see if it works. We have home energy squad audits. I had one of these done at my house. I think it's the best part I thought is they replaced all my light bulbs. So now I have all LED light bulbs, which makes the house a lot brighter. So when you're old, that's really a nice thing to have. So home energy squad audits are pretty cool. We have commercial loans for anybody for your business if you need a commercial loan. All right, and then next we also have some emergency loans, which during the winter Your furnace goes out, some pipes freeze, and you're thinking, I can't live here. Well, we'll give you a quick loan. We have emergency dollars available to help you get your house habitable again. Because we want you to be able to live in your house. We want our neighborhood and people to be able to do that. If your block has a neighborhood night out, we have grants, the small grants to be able to help you put on your little neighborhood block party. You know, so we can get your street blocked off so you could have some fun with all of your neighbors. Try to do it in the summer. You can all be outside. Not right now. We have rate barrel rebates. Again, you know, probably best in the summer when, you know, we can actually collect the rate a little bit or your barrels break. But we have rebates for that too, so we can collect the water, protect our environment. So we have a few things, that's my other piece of paper that I'm waving around. There's a few things that we're working on. We are upgrading our website. If you come to our website, you look at it, you think that this is a great 1991 website. Let's step up. So we are moving up and we're gonna be part of the real world. And we're redoing our revamp of our website. We're kind of excited about that. We are working on some Central Avenue events. That's our cultural corridor. That's our biggest commercial corridor that borders our neighborhood. And it is important for our neighborhood to support and build on everything that's going on Central Avenue. So we've got a couple things going on. We're trying to do a couple of pop-up events down there. We haven't quite flesh those out and figure out what they are, but we'll let you know as we do that. We are working with our other community neighborhood groups like Audubon and I think Northeast neighborhood group, Northeast Park.
Yep.
And we're working with them and we're pursuing the Open Streets Central Avenue grant with the city to try to be able to have some fun things that'll go on with Central Avenue. So we have some initiatives specifically for Central Avenue that we're working.
You're bringing open streets back,
Pardon me?
bringing open streets back to Central Avenue?
Hoping to, yeah.
We're hoping,
Yeah.
because I know they didn't, so we're hoping.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you think it's possible?
I don't know, I lost all my dance teachers, but we used to have a lot of fun.
All right, so we'll try to have
I gotta
fun.
plan, start planning now.
Okay. Well, that's why we're bringing other groups in to help us out.
That's right.
So we're doing neighborhood coalition building, so we mentioned that we're working with Audubon on that project. Well, we're working with Audubon and our other neighborhood groups on multiple different projects. And that is an important part as we go forward. I'm gonna mention that some more. We have a climate resiliency native planting grant we're working with Hennepin counties. They purchased or have a small plot of land on 22nd and for me, it's Old Highway 8. I think it might be called the Brandon Boulevard. Coolidge, Highway 88, whatever, but I remember in 1960, it was Old Highway 8. So that's what it is in my brain. So the corner on 22nd, there's a plot of land that's way overgrown and it looks like a mess. So there was a couple of suitcases thrown in there and it's a mess. So the county has asked us to come in and look at how can we clean that out and put native plants in. So we're going to do that and we're going to do that with all of your help. So part of that is education. What does it mean to have native plants and how does that work? How does that help our climate to plant those rather than, you know, what I usually plant in my yard? Because I have a lot to learn too. So we have an education piece to it. We have a work piece to it. We've got to get community involvement because we want to know what all the neighbors would like. So you're going to hear more about that and we want everybody involved. However you want to be involved, we would love to have everybody in Wyndham Park take part of that. So that's our climate resiliency native planting. Public Works outreach vendor is we have applied for a contract with the city, with Audubon and the lower Northeast community group. You guys know whenever there's a big project coming on, whether it's rebuilding Laurie Avenue, whether it's going to be rebuilding Central Avenue, or any other kind of big project coming on, we need to be able to work with all of the people that work in the neighborhood. And the city contracts with people to help do that, to do the education and working with the people in the neighborhoods. Well, neighborhood is what we do. So we're applying for that as a grant so that we can help facilitate that.
And Doug, we should give kudos where they're due that Councilmember Payne was huge in making that happen.
Thank you.
That program.
Thank you. And Narcan is part of we are trying to make Narcan, and that's our antidote for treating opioid overdoses. And for me personally, I've seen way too many people on the dead end of their opioid overdoses. I would prefer them on the walking side of their opioid overdose. And the way to do that is Narcan. So we're gonna try to make it, and Jared is working hard at doing that. We want to make Narcan, which is a life-saving treatment, available for as many people as we possibly can, as many people that need it. So that's our last piece, is the Narcan availability. We have kind of a fun thing we're gonna try to do. So we got a skating rink that park board, trying to close, it's open now, let's have some fun with it. So let's have some fun with our skating rink. So on Valentine's Day, we're gonna have a little bit of a party out here. We're gonna have a bonfire, we're gonna have music. So we're gonna supply some hot drinks, some snacks. Bring your family. What a fun thing to do as, it could be as a couple, hopefully it's families. We got a lot of little kids will be running around, and that's my vision, is the skating rink will be full. Well, the fire going, there'll be a lot of community building. It's hard to do that. Like I've said in the winter, what better way to do it around a bonfire than a skating rink? That'll really be cool. So this was not my idea, because if I go ice skating, the last time I did that, was probably 40 years ago, and I'm afraid I would break something. So I will not be doing the ice skating, but we have ice skaters in the neighborhood. So please come join us. I think to me, it sounds like it'll really be fun. And be brave, or braver than me. So, all right. I think we're ready for our Ward 1 update, right? Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Hey everyone, Elliot Payne, him. I am the Ward 1 council member and also the council president. So maybe I'll have a couple updates, one from the council member side and the president side, because it's very similar roles, but there's a lot more responsibility with the president. The biggest responsibility I took on this year was the consent decree. So normally we wind down for the holidays at the end of the year, get a little bit of downtime, and then typically kind of slowly ramp back up into our normal 2-week kind of like iterations of our council calendar. This year, we just came out swinging. Our very first official meeting, it was a special meeting called by the mayor, because we had finalized the negotiation between the Department of Justice. And so we had like a 7-hour closed session, and we all unanimously agreed to enter into a consent decree with the Department of Justice. So let me give a little background on what the consent decree is and what is unique about its existence in Minneapolis specifically. We've already gotten into a very similar type of legal agreement with the state of Minnesota's Department of Human Rights. And effectively what these documents are our police department was found to break state laws, or at least there was evidence of them breaking state laws. And so any citizen who breaks a law might be liable for a lawsuit, and instead of going to court, you might come to 2 parties and get into a settlement agreement. That's kind of like a generic legal thing that happens all the time. In this instance, for the state of Minnesota, it was the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, Rebecca Lucero, versus the city of Minneapolis Police Department. So it was a legal lawsuit that we settled out of court as the state settlement agreement. This is a very similar document at the federal level, finding that we were evidence of us breaking people's civil liberties in federal law. And so the consent decree essentially documents a set of reforms that the police department would have to make to be able to be in compliance with those laws. And so we're the only city in the country in the history of the United States that have 2 of these types of agreements, one at the state and one at the federal level at the same time. Now, there's a little bit of a caveat right now because we have the Trump administration coming in. So by us approving the settlement agreement or the consent decree last week, Monday, we filed with the court. So we signed the document, the Department of Justice under the Biden administration signed the document, and now it's going to be finalized through a court process, but that takes time. And we're not entirely sure what's going to happen in the coming days as the new administration comes into play. It is our belief, or at least our city attorney's belief, that by us both signing that agreement, we're kind of on rails towards that outcome. It would take something quite extraordinary for a judge to not, officially put the consent decree into place, but that caveat does exist. And I want to highlight just some of the specific elements of the DOJ consent decree compared to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights settlement agreement. Both of the documents are actually quite similar in nature. They outline a set of guidelines and provisions and reforms that the police department has to implement to be in compliance. And so these are things like, at the highest level, do we have good policies in place on things like use of force, on things like stop searches and seizures? Are we training people to that policy? And when people violate the policy, do we hold people accountable to that policy? Those are the three things that are kind of the pillars of how these documents function. And the thing that connects it all is an independent monitor. So we're not just, trusting the police department to say, hey, we updated our policy, we've trained, and we're holding people accountable. Like, everything's good. We have an independent monitor that, this is kind of one of the major expenses of this agreement. They are going to be doing auditing of our policies, auditing of our training, and auditing of our oversight capability to ensure that everything that we say we're doing, we're actually doing. And that that independence is supposed to build trust with the community that the police department is in fact living up to those reforms that they've committed to. So some of the big standouts in the DOJ consent decree was they had a very expansive section on the Americans with Disabilities Act. So how the police department had handled folks specifically struggling with behavioral crisis issues was very, very detailed out. We are actually quite ahead of the ball here because we have the behavioral crisis response. If you haven't been in this room with me before, that was the thing that I worked on before I ran for office. It's why I ran for office, because we were trying to implement it and we were experiencing a lot of pushback within City Hall on that kind of programming. It's now been launched and been successful, and now it's been recognized both by the State Department of Human Rights and now the Department of Justice as a really critical factor of our public safety system. And now we are court bound to not just continue having that programming, but building and expanding on it. And it had a lot of robust details around how we should be measuring performance, what kind of services ought to be offered, so on and so forth. There was another section on how MPD interacts with young people, specifically adolescents. So there are some provisions that are really trying to ensure that MPD is treating young people with dignity and respect, even to the extent that they're not supposed to be arresting young people if there is an alternative. Like, so if they can issue a citation or a warning, that should be tried first before arrest. They shouldn't be handcuffing them if at all possible. Of course, there's always kind of caveats for, exigent circumstances, but it's these guidelines that sets a floor for how we should expect MPD to interact with our community. And across all of these provisions, the goal here is to have more community understanding of how policing do their work, more community input on how those policies are developed, and just more community transparency in how they're living by those policies. And so behavioral crisis response, youth. Another big section was on supervision. This one actually tied in with our recent approval of the police contract. So one of the big problems I had with the police contract prior to the one that we have now was we had this concept called shift bidding. So based on your seniority, you could choose which precinct you wanted to be in and what shift you wanted within that precinct. What that enabled you to do was to basically shop around for your supervisor. So if you didn't like your supervisor, you could go to a different shift or a different precinct and get out from under that supervisor. We also had these arbitrary ratios of sergeants to patrol officers. The consent decree now has hard ratios around how many people you can supervise. So maximum of 8 direct reports per supervisor. And it has what's called unity of command. So most people are familiar with chain of command. That's kind of a military lingo. Police use that as a framework. Chain of command is, a patrol officer reports to a sergeant, reports to a lieutenant, reports to an inspector, reports to the chief. unity of command is that you have the same person that you're reporting to throughout that chain. So each of those patrol officers has a singular sergeant they report to. That sergeant has a singular lieutenant that they report to. So they're not getting rotated around by shift or precinct based on that shifting concept. So that's now enshrined in the consent decree. And then another big component of the federal one was around protecting First Amendment rights. So as you all may recall, during the uprising in 2020 after George Floyd's murder, there were a lot of journalists that were harmed during a lot of the protests. Journalists who clearly showed their press credentials that were, either tear gas or hit with rubber bullets. And so there's a huge section on how police are supposed to respond to what are called First Amendment events. And so those are kind of like some of the big high level things. And then it really builds on the state settlement agreement. So, requirements around use of force reporting, stop, search, and seizure, a whole slew of policies and procedures that we're going to have to update and abide by. The DOJ consent decree, some of it almost feels like copy and paste, but there's actually a lot of expansion, especially when it comes to the data reporting, things around early intervention so that we can see how officers, like if there's signals that they may be having stress or fatigue that might, impact their performance and their interactions with the community. So it's a pretty robust document. It's all online. I mean, it's an interesting read, but it's a pretty technical read. But one of the goals is that, especially with our independent monitor, we're going to start building deeper connections between MPD and community so that our community understands some of the reforms that MPD is going through, but also MPD is building deeper understanding of the community. And there's a huge component of that within the consent decree too. So that's a lot of information I'm trying to condense down, and even that might be too much. But that was the very kind of like role of president. Some very specific and relevant things. Well, as council member, I wanted to share some updates on the old nursing home. It has been up for auction, not up for auction. We had a pretty big meeting here. Was that 2 months ago about comments?
November. Yeah.
From our strategic inspections group. So the city is monitoring it as a vacant building. It does monthly inspections. We've been encouraging folks to continue reporting things to 311, or if they see that a window has been broken into, or there might be people that reported it to 911. We've got extra patrols going on. It's not enough. But one of the things that we learned about the auction that ended up getting canceled is that the owner had its insurance claim out, probably for, I don't want to speculate, but there was some water damage. It looked like maybe some of the pipes froze, or maybe somebody got in there and released the sprinkler system. It sounds like there's some outstanding insurance claims that the bank wants to have resolved before it goes up for auction. That's one of the challenges that's happening right now. Another barrier is that there was somebody that was interested in purchasing it a few months ago, and in doing their due diligence, one of the challenges they ran into was that because it's been vacant so long, it's been downzoned to kind of generic zoning of this area, which would mean that it could only house 16 units. And I think it has something on the order of 50, 55 units, somewhere in that range. And so not only would they have to put the money in to restore the building, they would have to put legal expenses into getting zoning amendments. So I'm working with our CPED department, the planning department, to try to get that zoning upzoned so that if there's anybody who is interested in buying it, that won't be, that like bureaucracy wouldn't be a barrier to it. Obviously, the building needs a lot of work, but at least they'll do due diligence based on the state of the building rather than, administrative barriers.
Mhm.
And then finally, one of the last things that we do at the end of the year is approve a budget. Typically, the mayor recommends the budget in August. In December, council has an opportunity to bring amendments to the budget within the mayor's recommendations. One of my budget amendments was to do a study on social housing, which as opposed to public housing, social housing is essentially using the same tools of the private market to build housing and just managing that housing. I think there's gonna be a process to this, but I'm trying to use this as a catalyst for maybe the city getting involved with this building in a deeper way, because it seems like the private market is just not that interested in this building. And if there's an opportunity for the city to take ownership of this building, renovate it and manage it as perhaps an SRO, a single, what does SRO stand for? Single residence,
Occupancy.
single occupancy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that it could be housing or something more productive for our community than just sitting there. So that's kind of the very locally focused things that I'm looking at. Any questions?
While folks are thinking about a question, I'll just point out with the sidewalk next to Twin City Gardens, it's a great opportunity to report them for not having shoveled their sidewalk. It's important that they get documented for not doing those type of things, shoveling sidewalk, removal of ice, mowing their lawns on both sides. So Hayes and Garfield side.
Yeah, and the reason it's important to report even something as small as sidewalk is 311 is how the city will, initiate enforcement oftentimes. So the citation is often triggered from a complaint, but it also is a retrospective so that we have a history of data to show how many complaints have been submitted. So oftentimes I get a lot of feedback from people that they're not satisfied with 311 because you either call and you're on hold for a while. So pro tip, you can email 311 or use the app and not have to sit on hold. But even then, when you get it in, it feels like it takes forever for the city to be responsive. And I will be frank, the city needs to be better at those things. But the other half of it is that we have a long historical record of the types of complaints that we're receiving, and that can help prioritize that building for additional enforcement, additional scrutiny, and so that the volume of those reports also helps from that regard. So.
What was the reason you got that?
What was the reason that got what?
Down the building.
Because it was unoccupied for so long, so it's kind of like, for instance, we have a moratorium on drive-throughs, but if a current drive-through exists, you can continue operating it. But if it doesn't, if a building with a drive-through didn't exist for a year, then it would lose its permit for the drive-through. So it's kind of a similar thing here where because it hasn't been occupied for so long, its licenses all are basically expired. And so it would have to renew that higher occupancy license. And I think frankly, it was probably a clerical error when we did the comprehensive planning, which literally took 7 years to get resolved in the course of the legislature. So somewhere along the lines, that maybe was missed to say that building isn't a 16 unit building, it's a 50 unit building, so it should be zoned for 50 units.
People online.
Speaking of vacancies, kind of wondering on the property that's on 18th and Central, there's that house.
Yeah.
Yeah, the haunted house that has like windows out of it. Is anything gonna be done with that? I know that the city went and has taken charge of that, and then there's also a vacant daycare that we're starting to see more graffiti on. Again, people are driving to Northeast. It's kind of looking like a not great in that area.
Yeah, so that area where the daycare is had a development plan, and it actually was like pre-COVID, they were almost ready to break ground and they didn't get the financing together. Then COVID happened and it was on pause for a while. Then they started getting the financing together and it was getting close. Then the interest rates went up. And so they still have a plan to build, I think, about a 5-story multifamily housing there. And the developer that owns that land also owns the house as well. And so I think that project not moving forward is somewhat tied to that house. I also believe that house, they attempted to get historical preservation. I don't think they did get historical preservation, which.
I thought they did, but
Did they?
I thought so.
Oh,
They had, but who knows why.
I think they did, and that's why the house is still there, because that's one of the kind of like double-edged sword of historical preservation is that now there's a higher threshold for, you know, what we have with this building is it's in the vacant building registry. After 5 years of enforcement, if it's still not resolved, the city can escalate some of the penalties up to and including like demolishing it, right? But a historically preserved, a house with historical preservation has protections from demolition. And I think you are right. I think it did actually hit historical preservation. So that's one of the challenges too. And so the developer that owns the daycare has been in close conversation with the neighborhood about that house, because there's several people in the neighborhood who see the historical value of this house. And they've even raised funds to replace the roof to try to prevent additional water damage and things like that. But it's just been in limbo because of the weird finance, like post-COVID finance climate. And I know that they still have interest in doing that development. I just don't know what the status of their financing is for that. And I believe they were planning on doing something to restore that house as part of that, but I'm not entirely sure the specifics.
Is it normal to shake adrenaline?
Other
and-
questions?
So I would just as soon see the nursing home get torn down and have supportive, family supportive housing put in there for kids that were going, say, to Pillsbury School.
Yeah.
And have a community to house kids right here next to the school. And that nursing home, I don't know if you've ever been in there, but it's not a very attractive building. Two of my grandparents died in that building, and it wasn't my uncle, who was a covenant minister, was on the board with the covenant homes that built that, said
No.
she had built it really poorly. So I don't think there's any significance to that building. I think couldn't or shouldn't be torn down.
Yeah, for the folks online, the comment in the room was the building isn't in the best condition, even when it wasn't vacant. It was not exactly the most pleasing space. Why not tear it down? These are the exact things that I did the study for, so that we can look into the feasibility of those types of ideas. Obviously, my study, I allocated like $50,000 for. That's not enough money to do the meaningful work, but hopefully it would be enough to create a roadmap so that we can say, this is actually worth allocating resources to, so that we can either acquire it, tear it down, acquire it, renovate it, or whatever would make the most sense. Great. Thanks, Albert. Anything else?
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
I think we're really fortunate that every 2 months we get to get this update. I just find this is just fascinating. And I think it's just wonderful. So thank you very much for coming and taking the time every 2 months.
Yeah.
Think about it, Phyllis said, I think it's just, it's very, makes these meetings really, really worthwhile to hear that. And you're welcome to come to on Valentine's Day. Come on. Bethel, keep it at that.
Yeah.
That's okay. So do I have our next guest here?
Queuing them up in 1 second. Give me stall for me, Doug. Stall for
We're
me.
gonna talk about, if we're gonna talk about our lead lines coming into our houses. And how we're gonna work
Back open,
those with the city. So all of us live in, if you live in Northeast, we live in old houses, right? Mine's built in 1938. You know, it is the oldest house I've had. The house I grew up in or was born at, my grandfather made in 1952 on Washington, so that was old. So from 1952, 1938, they all have lead lines coming in. My house has been replaced because I went online and looked to see if it's been replaced. But I think the whole idea of lead service lines is fascinating, and because of the ages of our neighborhood. We don't live in the suburbs where the houses were built in the 90s. We live here where we have these really cool older homes, and with that comes cool older home issues. And one of them is our lead lines.
Okay, can you talk to John? There's John.
John, hi.
I can see myself on the screen in the corner of the room.
All right, good.
So am I able to share my screen onto your screen? That might be easier.
Yes.
Because I
The answer
also
is
have
yes.
a couple things I want to share besides the PowerPoint.
Let's make
So
sure though.
let me try to do it and I'll see if it works.
Yeah, go for it. Otherwise,
Okay, share screen to share. Let's see if that works.
oops. There.
Does that work?
That is working.
All right.
Okay,
John House, thank you for being here and thank you for enlightening us on our lead service lines.
Yeah, no problem. So my name is John Howes. Also with me is Marie Askian. She's kind of the top chief for anything in the distribution system for Minneapolis Water. We're both with Minneapolis Water. I'm involved with the lead service line program that we just started in fall of 2024. So we're just getting started with this program. This year in 2025, we're kind of we're increasing the replacement rate from about 200 or so, 200 to 300 to almost 1,000 that we're intending to do in 2025.
2024 was the first year of federal and state grant funding for lead service lines. And so, just so you know, prior to that, if somebody had a lead line to their home and it was leaking, we would have to assess the cost of the replacement of that line to the property owner. So this has been just a great gift from the state legislature and from the federal government to have this funding for lead line replacement now.
So with that, we have a couple slides to show you. It's not too long of a PowerPoint, but just to give people some background on what the system is in Minneapolis and what we're intending to do with this program. So to start off, this graphic here is a profile view of a typical service line in the city. So you have the main and in the street that's always about 8 feet deep, and that's all publicly owned. And it's important to also note that the treatment plant, the mains, and the water that we treat at our Fridley and Columbia Heights campuses they never contain any lead. The only lead in the system is once you get into the private service lines and into the fixtures inside the actual premises. So like I said, the water main is public. Everything else, including the tap into the main, is privately owned. And a lot of people might not know that. They think it might be split ownership like it is in St. Paul or other municipalities. But Minneapolis, it is all privately owned from the tap all the way, including the curb stop, all the way into the home and of course, the interior plumbing. So as Marie mentioned, prior to 2024, we were not allowed to spend any grant funding on private infrastructure. And this grant program really just got started in December. Actually, just today at about 5 p.m., we submitted our first reimbursement request for lines that were done in 2024. So that's how close on the starting line we are to this program. So also with this service line, it's important to note that when these were installed, the portion from the main to the curb stop was always lead, and the portion from the curb stop into the house was galvanized iron. Lead is a lot more malleable and flexible, so they install that to get underneath other utilities or maybe around a tree or other conflicts, and then they would kind of have a straight shot with the galvanized into the house. Funnily enough, the galvanized portion a lot of times would fail prematurely. So we'd have instances where a line would be installed in roughly 1922, and then you'd see a repair record in 1929 where they replaced the galvanized iron with copper. It was just that poor of a material. There are still some galvanized segments in service, but I would say at least 2/3 of all homes, that galvanized portion has been replaced with copper already. So we're only talking about the portion from the main to the curb stop to replace. Which makes it easier. You don't have to get, we don't have to go all the way into the home, and it's less work, obviously. This is a image of the three different materials that are the two materials. Obviously, we're replacing everything. We're not replacing with galvanized or lead. All replacements are with copper. Any new developments or new homes or any leaks, we don't allow any partial replacements. It always has to be 100% copper for 2-inch and smaller service lines. So this is kind of an image of what the copper looks like. The lead was, like I mentioned, is a very dense metal, very malleable, but it is a known toxin to humans if it gets into your bloodstream. Some background. It's also another important thing to note that the majority of cases where lead gets in the bloodstream of people is not from the drinking water itself, especially in Minneapolis, the way we treat our water and take care of everything, but it's really from deteriorating lead paint or toys that, very old vintage toys that might have lead inside them. That you're a lot more likely to get exposure to that with especially the paint. And that's, I think everyone here at this meeting has heard of lead paint, and you might have seen the disclosures on real estate documentation and stuff like that. So, and the way I mentioned earlier that if the mains themselves and the treatment, there's no lead in the river, that would, it's only in the service lines. Another thing that we do is we have a very stable water that we put out at our Fridley plant. And we do add orthophosphate, which is mandated by the Minnesota Health Department. That is a food grade additive that forms a crust on the inside of the pipe that keeps any of the lead or galvanized iron from getting into the water. And those two things are they keep Minneapolis water well underneath any type of limits that are set out from the federal government, the EPA. And we've never had an issue with lead. I know lead gets into the news with municipalities like Flint that have made a lot of mistakes, but we take our treatment and distribution very seriously, and it is becoming more into the news. What people are just discovering that they might have a lead service line, but we've known about it for decades, and we treat our water and our system accordingly. So the program itself, as we mentioned, it just started in fall of 2024. It's a combination of state and federal funding that allows municipal or water utilities rather to contract out and replace service lines at no cost to the service line owner. The only thing it might not cover is if you have a finished basement with drywall or radiant heating or ceramic tile or stuff like that, it does not cover the repair of that material. But if it's an unfinished basement, which a lot of older homes are with the concrete or concrete block, we do patch the concrete back to a prior work condition. The way the work is done, it's 2 small utility holes. This is roughly the size of a hole. One on top of the main where we disconnect the old one and install the new tap for the copper, and then one at the curb stop location. From these 2 holes, usually it's bigger than this. I think they were just starting roughly about the same size as this. From these 2 holes, we're able to do all the work. We don't need the open trench service line into the house. We can do everything through specialized equipment that we set into the holes, and essentially it's a small directional drill machine. If you've seen those or familiar with those, we shoot it into either the house or just to the curb stop location and then pull back the copper. And this is an example of what the copper we replace with, the type K soft temper copper, which is the highest grade for water utilities. A lot of people are asking, great, where do I sign up? How do I get on the list? At this point in time, we don't have an opt-in program where you can just sign up and we'll get to you next. We have to follow legislative prioritization that was given to us by the state, such as historically underserved communities. In Minneapolis, we have 2 large green zones, we call them, the north side green zone and the south side green zone. That pretty much matches that language. So we do have a 5-year goal to replace all service lines within. Yes, Drew, I'll share some helpful links at the end of this for to check if your service line's been replaced. But we have to follow the prioritization for the state. So we're starting with these green zones, especially. There's also prioritization to ensure that we spend the dollars as carefully as we can. So if there's any street reconstruction projects or resurfacing or anything where we can kind of take advantage of the surface being removed and save costs that way, we're going to do that. And so far it's been pretty easy to select because we're actually trying to match those together where we have a resurfacing project within a green zone and stuff like that. But that's what we're following at this point in time. Another big component, which I'll mention, is because these are privately owned, we have to get a signed waiver from each individual service line owner that says, yes, you can replace it. And I understand that I'm responsible for fixing my drywall or anything. I think the other component is a hold harmless from the contractor. That is a huge step. And a lot of people are apprehensive to sign it because they might think it might be a scam, or people are very wary of scams, especially in 2025. You know, it seems like every phone call you get is somebody trying to get something from you. So that's been our biggest challenge in 2024. We spent a lot of hours trying to get these forms from people. And honestly, what's worked the best is having a contractor out there day after day after day, and people realize, well, this is legit. I can actually get free, you know, $8,000 worth of work for free, and I just have to sign this and give it back. And that's been one of our most successful ways of collecting these forms, is once people actually see their neighbor got theirs replaced, they're a lot more likely to sign it. So we do intend to have opportunities to submit these forms in advance of work. We don't have that set up yet, but I'm expecting later this year we will, and then be able to store these forms internally, kind of on a smart sheet deal where we don't have to, so we can start collecting them citywide, even if it's not going to be this year that you get yours replaced. Service line, I kind of mentioned how it works. They set a machine in here, shoot it in, and then pull the copper back. These are a couple images of actual work that was done. This was in the north side, I think on Colfax. Roughly the size. This is a larger size than a typical residential, but that's kind of what it looks like. The curb stop, and then they connect it back to the main over here. This is again an example of the actual dimensions of what it looks like. We're not taking out retaining walls and fences and landscaping. We can do everything we need from these holes. And then we do restoration, and restoration is included in the cost. There's no cost for sidewalk panels, sod, curb, or any street restoration to the homeowners. It's all part of the program. This takes roughly 4 to 6 hours to do a line on a standard case. So typically a crew of 4 can do 2 per day. And of course, the water will be shut off during the time when the lines are being swapped. So a lot of people, I think all of you should have received a letter in the mail if you do have a lead service line. This is the first year that we are mandated by the state to send a letter to anybody that has water coming through a lead service line. So if it's an apartment building, then however many units are in that apartment building would get that letter. So we ended up sending roughly 55,000 letters out this year, which was a big lift for us to get those out and get them out correctly. And that in turn, a lot of people just learned that they actually have a lead service line. A lot of people are kind of panicking. What should they do if they need to buy a filter? And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, in Minneapolis water, we know about the lead, we know our system pretty well. And the way we treat our water keeps any lead from getting into the water itself, so it hasn't really been an issue for us, so there's not a ton that is gonna change. You know, a lot of these lines are 90, 100, 110 years old and they're still in service. But things you can do, you can check this map. There's a QR code, and I think Thomas sent these slides out. Otherwise, you can just go to Google and type in Minneapolis lead service line map and get this. So that's how you can check to see if you have a lead service line. It'll be a red dot on your address. If it's blue, it means non-lead. Some common practices, you can let the water run before you consume it, especially if you're on vacation for a couple weeks. You don't want to maybe take the first blast of water. You can let it run for a few seconds. Cleaning aerators, you can unscrew them typically from a faucet. And I think I did mention, but even if you get your lead service line replaced, if you're in a home that has very old water fixtures, that can also be a source of lead. Newer fixtures don't have, they're non-lead rated, but older fixtures can be a source. Oops. And then if you want any further confirmation about your specific service line, we do offer free lead testing kits that we make ourselves, and then we take it back to our laboratory, test the water, and then send the results back to whoever requested it. So far, I think there may have been 1 or 2 out of thousands that have above the limit. And one of them was taken from like a 6-month-old faucet that hadn't been run for 6 months or 1 year. And then after that, it was reported back as non-detect. And then I think the other one was an error. So again, we're not super concerned about our system having, huge amounts of lead or anything.
And if you've submitted for a lead test kit already, please understand after the letters got sent out, we have a huge backlog, and so we're working through that list as quickly as possible. We're probably in the 3,000 to 5,000 request range right now.
And we're putting them together ourselves when we have a spare hour or two. We have a little setup in our Fridley campus where we're putting boxes together and water bottles and stuff like that. So we're going as fast as we can to crank these out. It's all pretty new to us. We haven't done that before. One other thing I will share before answering any questions. This is the map that I mentioned. You can check your area. This is the Wyndham Park neighborhoods. You can see we have a lot to do in this area. And then this other map is the 25 replacement areas. So the only addresses in Wyndham Park in 2025 are just the Lowry Avenue corridor. Lowry Avenue is a street reconstruction project, so we have these addresses here, but essentially we don't have anything else besides that. This map is not publicly available yet, but later this year, the plan is to have this all public facing, and you'll be able to check. I want to have these addresses on different layers for, we have 2025 here. I also want to have 26 and 27 once we have our plan for where we're going to go. We do plan to increase our count by another 3 to 4 times what we're doing this year in 2026. So we're ramping up at a pretty fast pace. We're doing about, like I mentioned, 800 to 1,000 this year, and in 2026 we need to be at about 3,500 to keep pace with federal guidelines. So I don't have any more update what your house might be in 26 or 28. I don't have that yet, but we'll get to you as long as the funding is there. So that's what we have.
Questions?
Anybody have any questions from here? Or anybody on Zoom have any questions they have?
I have a question, John.
Sure.
basically, as far as worries concerned, you just use the test kit, send it in, and as far as if you see your house on the map, it's not like your water is dangerous, but can you go through a little bit about if your house is red or whatever, is that how much you?
So yeah, if you see your property on the map with a red dot, that means you have a lead service line, whether it's lead and then copper past the curb stop or lead and galvanized past the curb stop. It doesn't show that on this map, but it means you have one or one or the other. Like I mentioned, you could order a test kit to put, to get more confirmation about if it's a non-detect or if it's and the federal limit for lead in water is extremely small.
It's like,
I believe it's 15 ppb, and they're
yeah, parts
reducing
per
it
billion, and
parts per billion,
it's,
which is
yeah, it's
a
like the
drop in a swimming
equivalent-
pool, I think.
it's like 3 drops in a 55-gallon drum or something. I think. I can't,
Yeah, it's
don't quote me
something
on
like
that, but it's a very small quantity, but nonetheless, we've been testing our water in the early 1990s. Is when the lead and copper rule first came out from the US EPA, and we started doing sampling of homes that have lead service lines. We've been doing it for 30 years now. We've been feeding orthophosphate since 1994. So we've never had a problem with being out of compliance with the federal standards. So we've got a clean track record. We really take this seriously because we want to protect our residents.
Yeah, and I just Googled it. 1 ppb is 1 drop in a swimming pool.
Okay.
So the
but
EPA's guideline is 15. They're reducing it now with this latest legislation that came out in December from 15 down to 10 ppb. And we've regularly been, I think, about 2 to 3. So we are, and that's average with the highest, like letting the water sit in the faucet and then taking a sample after that and following all the legislation for that. So again, we don't think it's a huge issue, but we are taking advantage of this program to replace lines for sure.
We have one other question here. You go ahead.
I'm curious about schools are planning.
I can't hear very well.
yeah, I
online.
apologize. I can't hear.
Are schools part of this plan?
Yes. No, schools and larger water consumers typically have larger service lines. And if it's larger than a 2-inch line, they would not have any lead to begin with. I mean, even a 2-inch historically might be pushing it.
Nonetheless,
but yes,
there are fixtures in a lot of old schools that have a higher lead content. And there is, as part of the rules, the latest revision just required enhanced sampling in schools. We're working with the Department of Health to make sure that we comply with the new rules that require this advanced sampling.
Other questions?
All right, any other questions?
The chat.
We have a question in the chat, and I'm wondering if maybe just in the interest of time, maybe John could respond in the chat itself.
John, there's one in the
I
chat.
can just read it here.
Sure.
I'll drag it over. I think you guys can see.
From Drew.
Can you see my screen still? I moved it up over.
Yes, Jim.
Okay. Anyone have a link where I can check my service line? Okay, I think that was answered. That map with the red and blue dots. Is there a schedule when our area will be serviced? Not at this time. The only ones are on the south side of Lowry for 2025. And I do expect to have that up later. For sure, the 25 and 26 areas have it up publicly facing later this year. For those of us not in the green zone, what is the timeline looking like for repair? Is this something we'll continue to be funding for, or will homeowners be responsible? So right now, I believe the program is a statewide program, is about 50% funded. So we're covered for the first half of it. And between Minneapolis and St. Paul, I think that's roughly about 2/3 of all service lines in the state. There are roughly 100,000 lead service lines in the state, and Minneapolis has 39,000 of them. St. Paul has maybe 25,000 left to do. So St. Paul did get started earlier for different reasons besides this program, but
Right,
so they
because
have.
they own the part of the line, and so they've had impetus to get going earlier on this.
Yeah,
We weren't allowed to spend our funds on it until now. But we're gonna keep pursuing federal and state grants, so I'm confident the Minnesota legislature has always prioritized programs like this, and I've gotta be confident that our legislators will see the value in this, but if the funding runs out, we will pursue whatever grants we can get to continue, but our end goal is that by 2037 to be lead-free Minneapolis.
Right, right.
as far as homeowners being responsible, I don't think that is in any legislation, right, Marie? Have you seen that?
Well, no,
That would be a
if
pretty
this
tough
grant
one to say,
program-
you gotta
if
replace it
the-
on your own, yeah.
Yeah, if the grant funding were to run out, but in the near term, we haven't seen any indicator.
Yeah,
There seems to be a lot of momentum.
for sure, yeah, nationwide. The lead pipe map is here. How long will the grants last? I think we just talked about that. How many homes would be serviced with the projected grant estimates? So we're intending to replace all 39,000 lead service lines. So to get all service lines replaced with copper. Thanks, John. Super helpful. You're welcome. Given the backlog of test kit requests, is there a recommended kit we can buy ourselves? Probably online. I don't think you're going to be able to test at that level.
But this one is free at least, and if it comes from us, it may be a wait, but we'll get to you.
Yeah, we have a lot better equipment in our lab than what you can find on Amazon. I'm pretty sure for testing at that level, that low of a level. I don't think you would get anything detected unless if it says it can test in the PPB. It might be fun to compare the two, but I don't have any recommended kits.
And we've got one more in that. So.
I didn't hear that either. Sorry.
Go ahead, Brad.
Loud as you can.
Okay, if you're from the curb stop to your basement, if that happens to be galvanized, so what you're saying is that would then be replaced, it's not, right?
A little bit louder, please.
So if you want me to, I can see if I can replace it. So if you come to someone's house, the line into their house is galvanized.
Yeah.
And when you replace the lead, you will also replace the galvanized?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. We don't leave any galvanized.
And under the federal rules, galvanized that's ever been downstream of lead is required to be replaced because the rust nodules inside the galvanized can encapsulate lead particulate. And so it's a requirement that if you've got galvanized still, we must replace the galvanized along
Whole
with the
thing.
lead.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we're gonna move on. We've got one more agenda item we want to get to. John, thank you, both of you. Thank you very much for this was just wonderful, very informative. I think for our neighborhood, with the older homes we have a lot of red dots. So
Yeah, you do. Yep.
forward to you guys. We have 3 years, but we'll be looking forward to turning those all blue.
Yes,
Well,
we are too.
But thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
All right, bye.
I'll add one more thing. After we're all done, if people have questions about lead poisoning, I'd be happy to answer them.
Because Doug is our local lead poisoning expert for real, like he knows these things. I'm sure the Parks Pavilion is a term that Doug has heard a lot.
So,
For those of you that don't know me, I'll just briefly introduce myself, because I'm rather new to the board. My name is Jared Moxart, I use he, him pronouns, and I've been on the board about 6 months. I'm rather new to the neighborhood, but I'm excited to meet all of you over the coming months and meetings, so. Our last agenda item of the night is going to be a candidate forum, in regards to the special election that's being hosted on, Tuesday, the 28th of this month. So just a little background, hopefully everyone did go and vote in the primary yesterday, but if you had not heard about this or this is news, we'll just get everyone caught up. At the end of December, our District 60 state senator, Carrie Dietzick, passed away after an extended battle with cancer. We're so grateful for the work that she did for our state, our city, and our community. But this did leave a vacant seat. Governor Tim Walz called a special election, which is the primary was yesterday, and again, January 28th on Tuesday is when that election will be. So we have both of our primary winners from DFL and GOP here with us tonight. We have Doran Clark and Abigail Walters, who will be joining us for a brief forum. So just some expectations of what this is going to be like. It's rather informal. This is not a fancy debate. We are a small neighborhood organization. But what you can expect is a short introduction from each of our candidates to get a chance to hear their platforms, and then we will open it up for questions for the remainder of our meeting. So you will pass microphones around and ask the candidates if our Zoom audience are having trouble hearing, just repeat the question. So yes, this will be a great opportunity for us as neighbors to get to know our potential future state senator, as well as a chance for them to hear what we as constituents are interested in terms of issues. So with that, I will open the floor to our two candidates. Got one mic. Another one.
go for it.
Okay.
And again, candidates, we're just using the microphones for Zoom land. It's not going to be amplified. Yeah,
It's on.
should go up. Yeah. Yeah. And the button that is by your thumb should be up. Yeah.
It is, okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so my name's Abigail Walters. I'm running, of course, for the state senate special election, and I'm the endorsed Republican from Minneapolis. I'm not really a politician. I did run for the Minnesota State House a few months back, but I really never expected my life to go this way. I'm a software engineer and I love that job and I'm pretty good at it. Yes, I never really expected to be a politician, but I kind of wanted to throw my hat in the ring just because I'm seeing some decline in my home. I live in Minneapolis. I live in the Marcy Homes area. Yeah, and I'm just seeing some decline. With all due respect to the city council and our legislatures, I'm just concerned about increase in crime. I feel we're being lied to a little bit about how much crime there really is. I feel the crime is up. I also feel like the opportunities for our graduate students are declining. Right now, Minnesota has the highest corporate tax in the country. And I think that's something really concerning for all of our graduates at the U of M and at Oxford. So I graduated from the U of M in 2017. So I'm just a few years out. So I recently went for that job search, and some of the states around us, and especially Texas, just have a lot more of those tech and STEM jobs. And these are great jobs that can kind of level you up for the next opportunity. You know, they offer great salaries, great benefits, and I just don't think Minnesota's doing enough to make Minneapolis a hotspot for that. So that's another big concern of mine. And of course, the public schools, I think you need to focus a little bit more on them. The funding has been increasing for them but the test results have been in decline. And I think that's something else I really want to focus on. And finally, I think a little bit more responsibility, spending the taxpayers' money. The past session, the budget increased 37% at the state level. I haven't had a 37% increase in my wages, and I don't think many here have either. So we're now running in a deficit, which is something that concerns me. And I think we just need more balance in the legislature to stop and slow that down. But I'm Abby Walters, and yeah, I guess we'll take questions after we hear a little bit from Doran.
Hello, everyone. My name is Doran Clark, and well, Senate District 60 is home, and more specifically, I like you led meetings in this room. So 15 years ago was the co-chair of Women Park Citizens in Action. And this is where I really started to see how the work that the state does affects us on a day-to-day basis. So I live here 5 blocks away, and northeast, southeast Prospect Park, U of M and Cedar Riverside is home. I'm an Edison High School dad. I coach track and cross country with my 8th grader at Inglaw Academy. She'll be at Edison next year. And I've seen the good and the wonderfulness of our community and how we all pull together. And I've seen with all the work that we do, pieces that the state can do a bit better. So for instance, we all want better schools. We all want to be sure that we have good housing, and I want to build housing. And 3, I want to have us move towards universal health care. Now, each of those, I think you'll be like, yes, let's do that. Where do we start? Because we will have divided government in the next 2 years, and we need to find some spots where we connect and move forward. So for me, on the school education side, where we start is eliminating some of these cross subsidies. What do I mean by that? If you have a student that lives here in Minneapolis and has special needs, the state says you have to spend 100% on that, as we should. The state says we will give you 100%. They actually only gives 44%. If that student says, oh, a better opportunity is going for me in St. Anthony, Minneapolis sends that 44% that we have gotten from the state, and then makes up for the additional 56% from property taxes and sends it with the child to St. Anthony. It's the right thing to do to fully educate that child, but I want the state to fulfill its promise to pay 100%. On advancing towards universal health care, where I want to start is with MNsure. MNsure, we should expand eligibility. So unions can opt in, we get a bit of a better pool, where it's bigger, it's wider, and it's going to drive down the prices for some of the unions and other groups that could opt in. I think unions is probably the quickest way to get in. And the third, housing. We need to build more now. I think Chris is right. We probably should. We got an opportunity right here. That doesn't solve the emergency that is homelessness and the encampments that we have. Hennepin County has $13 million housing, $13 million homeless cliff for funding this year. That's the one piece that I want to make sure we get done. There's others, but those are the spots I studied. So I'm your DFL endorsed candidate. Thank you everyone who voted yesterday. It was a spirited race. We have wonderful candidates. The other folks that were on the ballot, they taught me so much. And we're going to continue to work together because, well, we all live here. We're all neighbors. And this is how we make our communities better.
All right, we can open up for questions. Since maybe you can both hold on to mics and then just repeat the question when it gets asked so that our Zoom folks can hear what the question was. So I'll just do hands for questions. So our candidates are running good platforms. Oh, we haven't.
I'll be glad to start. We heard from Councilor Payne about our consent decree and the pieces from the state. From your view, from which will be a seat in the state senate, what would be your view and how would you impact that consent decree as it relates to our Minneapolis Police Department?
So as a state senator, the question is, as a state senator, what would your role in be with the consent decree, and where would you play a role at the state? So one of the spots that we can play a role is committees that we're on. I've asked to be on the Judiciary Committee if I'm elected. And that's a spot where we are able to help implement and guide and say, city, this is what you need to do. But I think it's more important to think about how we police. That consent decree is hugely important, but the how we police in Minneapolis is just important. We need to be able to find ways to de-escalate. Here's what I mean by that. We don't need a police officer with a gun to respond to every situation. Councilmember Payne has already been leading on some of the non-violent or non-armed responses. I want to change the rule where if you are, right now we don't have much for traffic stops. I want it to be that traffic enforcement, the non-armed officers can stop, can do the stops instead of only police officers with guns. So that is one key to the place that I want to change. I think helps the overall environment. So we are building a full community that is in trust with our community safety program.
So the Minneapolis Police Department is kind of operating at a fraction of their required workforce. I think this really puts them in desperate situations, and they're in dangerous situations every single day. I think we need a fully funded and a fully have full capacity for our police.
We have a question on Zoomland. As someone whose car was stolen 2 times last week, what will you propose to reduce crime in the city? And if you could repeat that.
So the statement was, my car was stolen 2 times last week. Sorry, that sucks. What will you do to reduce crime in the city? So I want to ensure that we are using police appropriately in terms of where we fund and fund well. We need to fund the whole system well, but I want folks really funded on the investigatory side. So that immediate piece, sorry that happened for you. I want us making sure we're going upstream to fund the investigative pieces. And we need to think about how we are providing wraparound services. Most often, the folks that are stealing cars, that may be could be entertainment, it could be for another reason, it could be a desperate piece. We need to make sure that those, if it's a younger person, that we are providing them the resources they need. So we have full wraparound at school so that we can be really disrupting that before it occurs.
I'm also really sorry to hear that. I think we have a problem here in Minneapolis where crimes aren't punished. I think crime should be punished more appropriately. I don't think someone should have the chance to have their car stolen twice in 1 week. I don't think someone should be able to repeat crimes and not pay their punishment. And if there aren't high enough consequences, the opportunity is still there. The crime of opportunity is still there, and it'll keep happening. So I think we need to make laws at the state level to make repeat offenses way less.
I'll go with one. So we already heard a little bit about housing, but that is a huge issue that I see in Minneapolis. I ride the bus every day. I walk everywhere and see this a lot with encampments, with people just looking for warm places. I'm curious what both of you think about housing, how you would address that in Minneapolis, since that is something that we are really struggling with in the city.
Yeah, so Jaren's question was what would we want to do about addressing homelessness in the city and kind of like the house instability? I'm a little bit concerned about this rising budget and the that might push other people out of their homes that are just barely making it. I think we need to focus on not only the working class, but also those who are homeless. But we need to do what we can to leave those who are just barely making it able to hold on to their home. And for the homeless, I think we need to keep these warm spaces for them, and we need to provide opportunities for them where they can get back on their feet. They can get away from whatever vices that are really, really harming them and help them get to a better place.
So for me, it's build housing, build housing, build housing. So I want to upzone across the whole state so we can build. We can build more triplexes, duplexes, if that's what you want to have in your, if you would like to build, and be able to. We think through where we have most of our needs in Minneapolis. One of the key needs is within Minneapolis public housing. There's a 200 million capital shortfall coming. I want to bond for that. So we may not be able to get to 200 million the first year, but we can sure take off a bite of that. So that's one of the bills that I'm looking to carry, is to help pull away at that backlog. Two, we need to have more innovative opportunities for addressing housing. So Vivo Housing, which is basically tiny houses inside of a very large warehouse, provides a safe, secure, locked location for each individual, providing a greater sense of dignity, greater sense of freedom, and the ability to then that one location provide much more wraparound services to help folks get back on their feet. That innovative solution has helped, and we need to expand that piece. Housing is the long-term solution. Providing shelters like that, and it's going to be well below zero this week. Where we need to be when there's the next fire, we need to have backup facilities, and we need to be working on this now. So last week when the last fire occurred, we were calling around to churches to see if we could find a spot for everybody. There wasn't spots for everybody because we haven't done the upfront work to say, all right, maybe we can open the armor, maybe we can open something else. We need to be doing the work now so that when that next fire happens, there is that emergency callback. Longer term, build, and that's going to help us. Well, drive down prices as Ali said, and be able to really make it well, I want more neighbors. Great opportunity.
Do you have any other questions?
Gotcha.
Yeah, this isn't a constituent issue, but there's a really strong growing urban rural divide in Minnesota. And I think I'm curious if either of you are elected, what will you do to create more understanding and collaboration with more rural senators? Because I see there's like a lot of judgment from rural people on what life in Minneapolis is like, and honestly from residents here on what rural life is like. It often because
Josh's question is about the perceived and action and perhaps actual urban rural design. I didn't start my biography out completely. I was born a son of a sheep farmer. Grew up on a sheep farm until I was 15 and down by Rochester. Then my dad died when I was a kid and we moved into town. So my brother still farms cattle. He still has his 80 acres and does these pieces. This morning I received a text from a high school classmate of mine, Keith Allen, who is the newly elected representative from Kenya. So I have, which is down north of Rochester, I have some of these pieces, but we have to be clear where the values that we have, we say them loudly and we stand firmly with them. And we need to be congenial. We need to be working to find places we actually can work together. And sure is going to invite Keith to come to Minneapolis and walk around with me, so he doesn't feel quite as comfortable pounding us, and I feel a little less comfortable poking him as well. So I think there is ongoing work that has to be done by your legislators. There's also, we need to ensure that it's not just loud bashing each other. We have common pieces, but we also need to be just as clear where we stand up for what is right that may be different.
Something I've always loved about Minnesota is how all of our sports teams, they're not local to we're not the Minneapolis Timberwolves, we're not the Minneapolis Vikings. We're Minnesota for all these sports. And I think that's a really great thing about Minnesota, that Minneapolis is kind of central. Anybody can make it to Minnesota to a sports game or something. And I think in a way, Minneapolis is shared amongst our whole state. And especially with something like the U of M campus in our district, that's something shared. People all throughout the state, they have a student or they know someone who's on the campus or who moved to Minneapolis for work or something. But I mean, I have my differences, of course, with the rest of my party as well. yeah, maybe pound their fist a little bit or something at us, but, I think they agree that Minneapolis is kind of a shared thing, but they don't quite see it as our home as well. But I think it's also in their interest that they want to see Minneapolis be a place where they send their kids to school and where they go to the Twins game with their family and things like that. So I think we're partway there already as Minnesotans, but, yeah, just slipping a little bit away.
Who are some politicians or leaders that you've looked up to over your life?
Politicians or leaders who I've looked up to over the years. So for me, it's folks who directly connect with community. So if you have it, one of my favorites is Elliot Payne. I love your here, Elliot. And part of what inspires me about Elliot is that he builds community. And that is a key piece to how we succeed long term. We need to know our neighbors. We need to know what's going well, and we need to know where we need help. It's Paul Wellstone was always somebody who just was out there all the time. You could feel his passion. And that for me is another piece of just, let's go, let's do this. And another person, State Senator Sheila Cascade, she was a independent from Southeast Minnesota. And I liked her because she just quietly did the work. And we also saw that with Carrie Dietzig. I think we all have a Carrie Dietzig story of how she called, helped, and just seemed to know what was the right time to say, yeah, I think you need this, or got a question for you. And Carrie really, for me, was, you know, when Diane Loeffler died, I was chatting with her about, I'm gonna have to find someone to fill the seat, because I'm just sick about it. And she said, we get to be sick about it, we get to be sad about it, and then we get to work. And that's part of what inspires me with Carrie, is we just got to get to work. And that's what we're doing. The legislature started yesterday, and we need to get to work for these folks in Minnesota.
So part of my condition is I am a Republican in Minneapolis. I haven't had the pleasure of knowing so many politicians coming from Minneapolis. But I would say Walter Hudson is a favorite local one of mine. I think to your question, he's done some great work kind of bringing like the metro to the suburbs, to the rural areas. And yeah, I think he cares about all Minnesotans and wants us all to succeed and prosper. But yeah, not a lot of local connections for my condition.
We've got one or two more questions here, but we got one from Zoomland. I am concerned about the division and lack of collaborative politics in our state and nationally. How would you reduce rancor in the Capitol?
I suppose that one, I don't need to repeat.
You should repeat still, because they didn't hear Thomas read.
Yeah, if you could.
Okay. Okay, so I think the question was, there's a lot of division at the Capitol between the two parties.
State and nationally, yeah.
State and national, and for state, especially this week, we had some problems. I think in the last legislation, of course, there was a DFL trifecta, so there wasn't kind of a blocking vote ever. So a lot went through very fast, and I would say very furious. But I think now that there's this House divide, there's a blocking vote. And I think it might be good for Minnesota to spend some time slowing down the change and let us adjust to everything that happened in the past 2 years. And kind of, I think this blocking vote could be a good thing, just so we have to kind of come to more bipartisan solutions. The Republicans basically will have to be a part of every state decision now, at least in the House.
She's right on that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there is going to be as you know, similar to what Josh was talking about, there is going to be a requirement to play better this year. And that's where I think it's clear that for me, with education, with housing and advancing universal healthcare, we've got these big visions. I have the big vision, and I have clear first 2 and 3 steps on where I think we can make those steps forward. That I think folks on both sides will agree that, all right, if the state says they're going to be funding school lunches, the state should fund any school lunches and not come off local property taxes. It is in part style. So part of what made, everybody I've talked to about Carrie on both sides of the aisle is universal personally respected of. She treated you with dignity, she treated you with respect. And that's my commitment as well, and that I will work with dignity, respect. And to be clear, there are certain things that I will not bend on. I think that we need to have a state constitutional amendment that enshrines the ERA into the Constitution, so we have the right to choose. I will go to bat for trans kids. There are things that I will not bend on, and there are things that we can advance on those big lofty visions I have.
Can you just, I'm sorry, this is mainly for Doris. Could you clarify your comments about, education? I must have misunderstood. I thought you were suggesting that even though, special education is not funded, it's a federal mandate, but it is not and never has been fully funded. But I thought you were suggesting that the state has a requirement to fully fund special ed. Is
So-
that correct?
And I may have conflated. So there is a requirement that is fully funded and the state provides part of the
That's
funding.
right.
And so if that child leaves the district or goes to a charter school, Minneapolis has to provide the funding that the state provided. Minneapolis Public Schools has to provide that 44% and the additional 56%. So Minneapolis Public Schools pays that 100% wherever that child goes. Whether they're here in Minneapolis or they are in St. Anthony, or they're in, it's called the charter school, or it's called the special education cost subsidy. I want the state to pick up that whole.
So in Minneapolis, they fully fund special education.
Absolutely. Every kid gets it fully funded. And you may say, all right, we need to work on what the quality of that, but it is fully funded for each child. It's just this, where is the source? Right now, 56% of it, the state says we will fully fund it. They haven't yet. Comes from from us, where are those kids?
But St. Paul does not fully fund.
Well, they do as well. So every district needs to provide it for the kid that lives in where they.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Well, we will wrap up our candidate forum, but thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to be here. I know that it is.
Well, I want to also thank both of you for being here. You guys were
Thank you.
wonderful and thank you for taking the time here. You're down to a split to the end. You are, thankfully, we do not have another one of these until the elections. And for everybody else here, please vote. Get all your neighbors out to vote. This is, it may be winter. We may only see their eyes while we're shoveling, but when you see your neighbor's eyes while you're shoveling, tell them, hey, have you voted? So let's get everybody out to vote. Early voting is probably gonna start, but a couple of days. It seems we're always early voting. So everybody get out, everybody vote. We have two wonderful candidates. It is great to have a choice. So thank you for you two for being here. Thank you for Councilman Payne for being here. I'm really grateful. Thank you for all my neighbors for being here. So next board meeting, if you're anybody's welcome to come and join us. Just say, let us know if you'd like to come. We'll tell you where we're gonna meet. And we'll figure it out when the time comes. Our next neighborhood meeting is on March 19th, and we'll be meeting here again. So. If you have any questions, hang around afterwards, and let's we can talk some more. So thank you, everybody, for being there. Thank you. So thank you.
But the states have provide.
Then I can stick around.